uh, the last time when we were talking about, we discussed 1857. Social reforms we were discussing. Did we start the discussion or just started? So we had just started talking about social reforms, and we had started discussion with the Brahmo Samaj, right? Now, what we're going to talk about today is, firstly, we'll talk about so, see, this is what happens to middle class Indians, right? When they get used to AC and they come back to middle class, they realize their limitation. Now, what we are going to do is we are going to first talk about the Brahmo Samaj and social reforms in general. So, I'll just briefly revise what we discussed in social reforms, and then we'll take it forward. In terms of social reforms, I talked about that how the Brahmo Samaj represented one of the first organizations formed in India in the direction of social reforms. Now, from your prelims point of view, it is important to remember every organization, every newspaper, or whichever issue that Ram Mohan Roy was associated with. Okay, that is pretty important from your prelims point of view. So, Brahmo Samaj was established by Ram Mohan Roy, and here we had talked about that whether it was Ram Mohan Roy or many of the other social revolutionaries of 19th century India, they were predominantly the ones who had received some part of their education in the West, and it was this Western education which played a key critical role in their reformist mindset, as they were inspired by the social and the scientific development, social, political as well as the scientific developments of the Western society. For example, you see the abolishment of slavery in the West. Okay, this represented a movement towards social equality in the Western society, something that inspired a number of these social reformers who had received Western education also. We discussed that how, when you look at, for example, the invention of Galileo or the theory of Copernicus, both of them indirectly proved what? That it is sun rather than earth which is at the center of the universe. And this went in a complete contradiction to what had been propagated by whom? The church. That it is God created life on earth, and so earth is at the center of the universe. Galileo's invention of the telescope and Copernicus' heliocentric model of the universe had demonstrated that many a number of ideas propagated by the church were not necessarily true. Or, for example, you talk about the Newton's theory of gravitation, right? Why is it that apple falls to the surface of the earth? Church would say it is God's wish. At one level, everything is God's wish, right? But God's wish is equal to m1 m2 upon r square. Or the laws of gravitation is something that Newton perhaps discovered and gave a more rationalist explanation for a number of events around us. So this was something that Galileo discovered. Now, this was something that Newton propounded. When you look at diseases, why do diseases happen? Again, the church would say it is God's wish. It is a punishment for your sins, etc., etc. Right? So again, at some level, everything is God's wish. But if you look at Robert Koch, Koch gave what were known as the Koch's postulates, which pointed out that it was primarily microorganisms who, when entered the body, were responsible for causing a number of diseases. And it was not merely, and it was incorrect perhaps to say that it was because of God's wish, sins, etc., etc. So, for a number of social and scientific developments in Europe, inspired a belief in the idea of rationality. That is what the findings of Galileo, Copernicus, Newton, Koch, all of them are looking towards what? A rational explanation of the world around us. Or when you look at abolition of slavery, this is inspired by the idea of social equality. Also inspired by the idea of humanism, that all humans must be treated equally, and not that one must be treated as a commodity which can be bought and sold by the other. So humanism, or the emphasis on social equality, or the emphasis of rationality, all these ideas were coming from the West, and those who had received a significant degree of Western education were inspired by these political and social developments in the Western society. Some of them were the early founders of the Brahmo Samaj, including Ram Mohan Roy. Okay, so that is there. Now, in terms of the issues that the Brahmo Samaj picked up, and this is important from prelims point of view. In prelims, they ask this kind of a question, that with respect to the Brahmo Samaj, what is true? That they will give you statements about who formed the Brahmo Samaj, what were the issues picked by the Brahmo Samaj. So I would have told you that the Brahmo Samaj picked up broadly 3 types of issues. Issues related to the position of women, issues related to the issue of caste, and also apart from women and caste, they also talked about a reform of religion in general. Now, in terms of reform of religion, I would have told you that they argued, and this is something that Ram Mohan Roy and others pointed out, that religion has a number of, if you look across, so Ram Mohan Roy studied a number of religious texts of a number of religions, and he came to some conclusions which have been shared by many others. That, for example, if you look at religions, one of the things about religions is that often God or son of God or messenger of God is predominantly a male individual. We talked about this point before, right? No? Yes. So basically, if you look at some of the major religions across the world, you will find that either God himself or son of God or messenger of God. In Christianity, there is Jesus. In Islam, there is prophet. In Hinduism also, there is the Trinity of God, right? All of them are predominantly males, and all of them look like humans. Firstly, coincidence is that they all look like humans. Second coincidence is that they look like males. Okay, so this anthropomorphic vision of God, and that God looked like humans, etc., is something that they argued was perhaps very irrational, because if there was God, many of them argued that God was formless or was perhaps not something that looked very much like humans. And more importantly, the rationalists argued that idolatry, or the practice of worshipping idols, was something perhaps irrational, because God did not appear in the form of structures or in the form of physical bodies that we often imagined. Rather, it is the imposition of human imagination on what is perceived to be about God. So they said that there is no rational logic to worship idols. Okay, and also about polytheism. Polytheism is the practice of worshipping many gods. Now, if you look at many religions across the world, they are monotheist. If you look at Christianity, if you look at Islam, etc., they are monotheistic religions where they believe in one God, one messenger, everything one. Okay, but there are polytheistic religions also across the world. Hinduism is one of them, but there are others also. If you look at ancient Roman civilization, there was the sun god, there was the rain god, etc., etc. So here what they are arguing is against polytheism as well. Now, the reason why they are arguing against polytheism is because of 2 reasons. One, they are saying is that if there is God, it is likely that it is perhaps one entity rather than having multiple gods. But their bigger problem with polytheism is something else. The problem is that they argue that the more is the number of gods, more are the number of occasions, and more are the number of, basically not with the occasions also, more are the number of gods, more do you have the role of the priestly class. Because if you have a god for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, one of the days, one of the gods is going to get angry with you. Then what do you need? The support of the priestly class, so that you can compensate, you can ensure that whichever god is not happy with you for whatever reason, you can ensure that he or she changes their mind. So for that, what do you need? The support of the priestly class. So more are the number of gods, more are the number of practices, festivals, etc., etc. And all of them propagate at some level what? The hold of the priestly class. What they are arguing is that this hold of the priestly class needs to be done away with. Okay. For example, they point out another common similarity, that most of the religions across the world, their scriptures are written in a language that people barely understand or don't understand at all. For example, if you look at the Bible was written in Latin and Hebrew. Okay. Or when you look at the Quran, it was written in the Arabic script, which very few people read or understood. When you look at Hindu, some of the major Hindu religious texts, Sanskrit or Prakrit, okay, texts or languages that very few people understood. And who were the few people who understood these languages? The priestly class. So the priestly class was tell that this is written in your religious text, and if this is written in your religious text, you are meant to follow this. You cannot make your own reading and your own interpretation. So what they were against was polytheism, and they were against the hold of priestly class upon the society. And to oppose the hold of the priestly class on society, to oppose the hold of the priestly class on the society, what are they suggesting? They are suggesting a couple of things. One, they are suggesting is to translate religious texts into vernacular or local languages. They supported the translation of religious texts into local languages. Why? Because of the simple reason that then you can read and make your own interpretations. Okay. So then you want to celebrate Holi, you celebrate Holi. You don't want to celebrate, you don't. You make your own interpretations about which religious practices are. देखिए अभी क्या है, अभी कोड बता रहा है आपको कि which are essential religious practices or which are not essential religious practices. But then if you read a religious text, you can make your own conclusion. No Baba, no Maulana, nobody has to tell you which is the essential religious practices. You make your own conclusion and you decide which practice you want to follow, which you don't want to follow. And that is what? An individualistic interpretation of religion. Christianity mein, there is this tradition, that is Protestantism. Protestantism talks about individual interpretations. Catholic talk about following institutionalized church and following the teachings of the church. Protestants say that individuals can read the Bible, make their own interpretation, and thus have a more individualistic interpretation. When you have individualistic interpretation, is that more rational or not? And the Western society emphasizes what? Individuality or not? Yes, right? The Western society emphasizes individuality, and it is again here that by translating texts and making their own interpretations, you are supporting individualistic interpretations of religion and their following. What is important is that nowhere is the Brahmo Samaj saying that religion must be abolished. The Brahmo Samaj was not opposed to religion. They are only arguing for reform of religion, doing away with idolatry, doing away with polytheism, and doing away with the hold of the priestly class by translating religious texts into local languages. Also, you see that apart from translating texts into local languages, there is also a support for other ideas as well. That basically involved emphasizing rational interrogation of religion. So for example, whatever practice is there, okay, whatever practice is there, you can emphasize the rational interrogation of this practice. If there is completely no rationality which is driving any action, or it is clearly squarely irrational, they can be done away with. They are not saying that religion is immutable. They are saying religion can be changed, religion can be modified, and religion must undergo change over a period of time. It is not that something which was necessarily happening 2000 years ago must happen today. Okay, so they are saying religion must be reformed in the light of rationality. That is what the Brahmo Samaj is saying about religion. About caste and women, we will come to. First you write about tissue. So when we talk about the Brahmo Samaj, you can write down firstly. See, what we are going to do actually is, we will go one organization after other organization, discuss the major organizations, and then talk about reformists and revivalists. When I was telling you, I had broadly told you in the beginning of the lecture, not today, but last time, that about what all we are going to talk about. We are going to talk about reformists, revivalists. We are going to talk about the major 12, 13 major organizations, the issues picked up by them and the demands made by them, and the key leaders associated with them. And then the significance of 19th century social reform movements. All of that, we will talk about it. So, you can firstly write down the 19th century social reform movements. The 19th century social reform movements were initiated by the Brahmo Samaj, formed by Ram Mohan Roy, were initiated by the Brahmo Samaj, formed by Ram Mohan Roy in 1828. The Brahmo Samaj was a reformist organization. The Brahmo Samaj was a reformist organization which was inspired by the ideas of rationality, reason, humanism and universalism. The idea of universalism is also merely an adjunct that we all are a part of one common family, and we all are a part of one common family, that we belong to the same family at the world level. For example, you see within Hinduism also, the Vedas talk about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the idea that we all belong to one global family. So the Brahmo Samaj was inspired by the ideas of rationality, reason, humanism and universalism, which reflected the impact of the key political, social, social and scientific developments of Western Europe since the Enlightenment era. Since the Enlightenment era. Since the Enlightenment era. These Western ideas inspired Indian social reformers as many of these upper middle class social reformers received higher education in Europe. Next para. The Brahmo Samaj argued for the reform of religion. The Brahmo Samaj argued for the reform of religion in the light of reason. For the reform of religion in the light of reason, and supported the abolition of idolatry. B. Argued against polytheism. And C. Argued against the hold of the priestly class, and argued against the hold of the priestly class, on the society for which they supported the translation of religious texts into vernacular. Vernacular or local. For the translation of religious texts into vernacular or local languages. Okay, that is about religion. Now let's talk about caste and women. Now देखिए now I'm going to talk to you about caste first and then about women. Women में कुछ, it's very simple, straightforward, but let's talk about caste first. Now what I'm firstly telling to you, you've not done social issues, right? You've not discussed social issues, right? So I'm telling you about caste first. Okay. Now before we talk about what kind of a reform they suggested in the caste system, you should first know what is the caste system. Okay. Now, we all know that there are the four varnas, the Brahmin, Kshatriyas, Vaishya and the Shudras. They are considered as originating from, right, from the head originated the Brahmins, from the chest originated the Kshatriyas, from the thighs originated the Vaishyas, and from the feet the Shudras. So, now which of them are known as the Dalits? So, this is what is to be emphasized very clearly, so that don't bang your head against this later, is that what you know as the Dalits or the untouchables are the ones who are outside this system. Okay, Shudras are not the untouchables. Okay, the Shudras are not the untouchables. The untouchables were outside the system, and what you know as the scheduled castes, they are not a part of this Varna system. Rather, they fall outside the Varna system. Now, the Shudras, now we also know that this is the caste system. तो एक line तो ये सबको पता है कि this is the so-called mythical origin or the mythological explanation for origin of the caste system. But what are the characteristics of caste system? This I am not going to dictate. If you want to write, you can write with me. Why am I telling you this is because this is important to understand what is there in history. Okay. So when you talk about the characteristics of the caste system, one of the characteristics of a caste system is what? It is a social system of what? A caste based social system of division of labor, right? That all caste groups have specific occupations. The Brahmins are the priestly class, the Kshatriyas are the warrior class, the Vaishyas are the merchant class. Now, apart from these three, they are the specific caste groups with specific occupations. All those who perform neither the priestly, the warrior or the merchant economic activities are classified as the Shudras. The Shudras are the one which is a more heterogeneous group, and they do manual, physical labor associated with it. It is a more heterogeneous group. So for example, if you look at what? If you look at those who rear cows, right? Those who are the ones who rear cows for milk, or those who are, say, the Mali or the gardener caste, or those who are the ironsmith, or those who are the potters, Kumhar, all of them basically come under Shudras and many more, varying from region to region. They are all classified as Shudras, which are performing, what differentiates them is that they perform manual physical labor. ये तो mental labor कर रहे हैं, भगवान का ध्यान लगा रहे. They would once in a blue moon pick up arms against the outsider, and the merchants are पैसों पे ध्यान लगा रहे. Right? They would do trade. They're not doing manual physical labor. Who is doing manual physical labor? Shudras, who are also the landless peasants. The landless peasants are also the ones who were doing manual physical labors. They were predominantly the Shudras, and also some of them were the Dalits also, but predominantly they were the Shudras also. So what do you represent? What do you see is that the landless peasants were also partly Dalits and partly Shudras. And what do you know as modern day OBCs? Okay. Now all Shudras are not classified as OBCs. but whoever is a OBC is a Shudra. Not necessarily all Shudra groups are not classified as OBCs. OBC lists vary from state to state and center also, right? But I'm just telling you so that ये आपको broad पता तो हो कि कौन OBC है, कौन SC है ना? That is first thing to know. Now, what we say is it is a social system of division of labor. Now, what do you mean by a social system? अरे इसमें of division of labor, इसको समझना है बेस्ट चीज है इंजीनियरिंग कॉलेज also has a system of division of labor, है ना? If you get what? Computer science, upper caste. If you are doing chemical engineering, lower caste, Shudra. So अभी आप ITI में, IIT नहीं गए, आप ITI गए, right? So what do you see that there also I am using this metaphor to arrive at a bigger point there actually. So if you see, computer science wala is the upper caste in the engineering college, chemical engineering wala is the lower caste. Now, can a lower caste individual become an upper caste individual? In engineering college it is possible. That in IIT in the first year, if you do exceptionally well, you can go from chemical engineering to computer science also. If you perform very well, there is scope of promotion, right? You can leave the others and you go to the higher group. But this is not possible where? In the caste system. The caste system is also a system of division of labor, and what is happening in placements etc. in your is also a system of division of labor. But there is a crucial difference. The caste system is something which is hereditary. यहाँ तो आपकी रैंक के वजह से गए ना आप कंप्यूटर साइंस में, so but here it is hereditary and here it is rigid and fixed. Once allocated a particular caste, you remain in that caste. You can still move from chemical engineering to computer science, but you can't be a Shudra who can one day become a Brahmin. So, which system is more mobile? Which system allows for more mobility of individual? Engineering college rather than caste system. So, what we say is that the older systems were hereditary, rigid and fixed. A society in which an individual's position in the society is fixed by virtue of their birth or by virtue of their birth into a particular group, whether caste, race, gender, is something which is considered a primitive society, where an individual can achieve their position in the society, overcoming all other kinds of, restrictions, etc., is considered also a more modern society. So the problem with caste system is not that it is a social system of division of labor. The problem is essentially hereditary, rigid and fixed. So this is a social system of labor with these characteristics. Also, there is another characteristic, that in the caste system there is the idea of purity versus pollution, that the work of the upper caste is pure and the work of the lower caste is impure. देखिए ऐसा है, आप जाइए, and what is the practical significance of this? That often which is impure work is better paid or lower paid? Lower paid, right? For example, जैसे आप क्या करिए, आप go to a cobbler and buy a shoe from them. Cobblers also sell shoes, okay? आपको दे देगा वो 400-500 रुपए में जूता, और दुआएं भी देगा, है ना? You go to Nike, he'll tell you, sir, this shoe is designed extra comfort, extra ये, extra वो. ये shoe breathes also. Fabric is also very nice. So shoe has all the latest technology. वो 10,000 का है. Okay. So often when the same work, yes, obviously there may be some technological advances which may be offered by Nike, which may not be offered by a local cobbler, but you will think twice or 100 times paying before your local cobbler 500 rupees. But when you go to Nike, वो shoe designer ने बनाया, शूद्रा ने नहीं बनाया. Okay, so shoe designer you pay 10,000 rupees also. So often the work of a lower caste is something which is often disregarded primarily because his work is considered less worthy. And also the result is that it is lesser paid. Okay. So it is in this context that if you look, the same thing, the work of a farmer is also producing food. Google can only bring food to your plate from the shop. Food comes in that shop because of the work of the farmer. The farmer is often also, landless farmers are also the lower caste individuals. Okay. So often nobody wants to be a farmer, everybody wants to be Google, right? So in that context, you see a society which devalues manual physical labor is also primarily because of the reason that it is also often done by the lower castes. Now, another thing about the caste system, another characteristic of the caste system is how is a caste system maintained? How are caste boundaries maintained? By the practice of caste endogamy or the practice of marrying within one's own caste group. That is what is caste endogamy, and restrictions on intercaste dining. देखिए, अभी आप इंजीनियरिंग कॉलेज में हैं, आप कंप्यूटर साइंस वाले, आप नहीं बात करते केमिकल इंजीनियरिंग वाले, लेसर मॉर्टल, that you are computer science, he is chemical engineering, so you don't like his face, you don't, suppose you are IAS अधिकारी, group A officer of the government of India, बस इसके ऊपर कुछ नहीं है. So but there is a group D officer, clerk, who is sitting next to you and having food. ऐसा कभी होता ही नहीं है. IAS के साथ बैठ के खाना खाता है, कंप्यूटर साइंस वाला कंप्यूटर साइंस के साथ खाता है, राइट, एंड केमिकल वाला केमिकल के साथ खाता है. So in that context, what do you see? What do you see? Often these are ways of maintaining identities of what? Groups, and preserving those identities also. Similarly, IAS से ही शादी करता है या उससे ऊपर मिनिस्टर के बेटे से बेटी से जो भी है, right? Often people marry in a higher, everybody wants to go higher and higher, right? So often there are restrictions in caste system. Caste boundaries are maintained primarily through the practices of caste endogamy or practice of marrying within one's own caste. So these are also often practices associated with the caste system. These are some broad characteristics of the caste based society. Now what is the Brahmo Samaj saying? Brahmo Samaj is saying that what we need to do away is with the practice of untouchability. Now what is this practice of untouchability? We have not talked about this. The practice of untouchability basically says, that if you look, that upper caste will take the services of the lower caste, and lower caste will also take the services of the upper caste. Okay, so there is a what? If you have a social system of division of labor, then a lower caste will also take the services of upper caste, and upper also will take the services of lower. There is a certain degree of complementarity. Okay, so in a society you need both computer science as well as chemical engineering. So both will exchange each other's services also. However, there is a difference in the position of the Dalits. The Dalits are not considered as a part of the Varna system and are thus cannot take the services of the higher caste. They are only meant to provide services to the higher caste. What services they provide to the higher caste is cleaning. Okay, whether that is the cleaning of roads, garbage, toilet, etc., whatever. So whether that is manual scavenging or the cleaning of garbage, etc., whatever that is there, that is the role of Dalits. If Shudras are considered impure, or Shudras are relatively impure to whom? To the upper caste. So the upper castes are pure and Shudras are relatively impure, but they are only relative, and the whole system is based on relativeness. The Brahmins are upper to whom? The Kshatriyas, Kshatriyas to the Vaishyas, Vaishyas to the Shudras, and thus Ambedkar argued that the caste system emphasizes a certain mindset that everybody imbibes in the society, and that is a hierarchical mindset. Every caste group and subcaste group has a caste group to look down upon. देखिए जीवन में, if you always see that oh so many people are above me, you will be dissatisfied, but you know there is somebody lesser than you, then what will you feel? A certain degree of satisfaction that you are also superior to someone. So for example, you go to engineering college, any other college, school also, I'll tell from my experience, I only always look from niche for my rank or my marks, only because my concern was not all who is above me, but how many are there with me or below me. So the caste system emphasizes this mindset in the society. That is why education system in India is also a kind of a competitive system, where your expertise and your knowledge ability is always determined by आपसे नीचे कितने हैं. You are Sharma ji ka beta only as long as nobody else is. Right. So a society, now this is one thing very, very true about education system. Education system neither in India nor in the Western world today measures competence. It only measures relative to others. So it pits the society in a zero-sum game. You come to the school, you come to education, you come to caste system, one always sees their relative position which has to be better than the other. It ingrains a mindset which is hierarchical in the society, where every caste is looking down on the every other caste group. Also, there are ideas of purity and pollution. Now, what are the untouchables? The problem is that they are not considered as a part of the system. They cannot take the services of upper caste. Also, they are only meant for cleaning and garbage and manual scavenging, etc., cleaning toilets, etc. And they are not supposed to enter the villages also. They would often live outside the villages. They cannot draw water from the same sources. They cannot be a part of public life. They cannot touch the upper caste individuals, that is there. But even in many areas, the sight of a lower caste individual was considered polluting. That is why the lower caste individuals were expected to come when? During the afternoon to do all the cleaning time services. Why? Because during the afternoon the sun is at the peak. So the shadow is the longest or the smallest? Smallest. So forget the touch. Even the shadow of a lower caste individual must not fall on the upper caste individual. And also during afternoon, क्या होता है? गर्मी. So everybody is inside their house. So the possibility of a upper caste individual sighting a lower caste individual or touching them or their shadow falling on them is going to be extremely less. So that the lower castes which are polluting, the untouchables do not pollute the upper caste. So that is the untouchables suffered the worst of the exploitation. So what the Brahmo Samaj, why I am telling this whole story is because of a reason. That the Brahmo Samaj is talking not about the abolition of caste system. It is talking about the reform of caste system and saying that untouchability must be abolished. Whereas the rest of the system can largely stay. They are not talking about the abolition of caste system in totality. They are only talking about the abolition of untouchability and saying that the caste system can be reformed. But if you understand the whole system now, you see that untouchability is only a part of the problem, not the whole problem in general. But they are not making a radical demand to demand the abolition of caste system. They are only demanding the abolition of untouchability, so that untouchables must not remain as a separate group. They must be included within the other four varnas. That is what they are saying. That they are saying that untouchability is like slavery. That you are not even treating them as humans. You are not treating them as equals. So do away with the practice of untouchability. That is what they are suggesting. Is that point clear? Yeah. No, that is another. That has got nothing to do with this here. Here, Vaishyas are referred to as the merchants, which have got nothing to do with other social, taboos or issues related to prostitution. That is a alag total. But that has got nothing to do with the caste system. That is that is there, but that has got nothing to do with the caste system. That is there. Anything else? Just a second. It's very hot. गेट खोल दे तो फिर आवाज डिस्टरबेंस होगा. ये गेट खोल सकते हैं क्या? हाँ? तो वो बेसिकली वेंटिलेशन हो जाएगा. हाँ विंडो. स्टूडेंट बोलते हैं वरना क्लास कैंसिल करता हूँ, बैठ नहीं पाता. पेशेंस पेशेंस. क्या आप बैठ नहीं पा रहे हैं? नहीं हो पा रहा है. अच्छा एक सेकेंड, पहले आप ये लिखिए जो मैंने पढ़ा. इतनी मुश्किल से पढ़ा है, पहले इसको लिखिए, बाकी बात. ये तो लिख लीजिए, फिर विल डिसाइड. 5 मिनट. इतनी मुश्किल से पढ़ाया मैंने, फिर रिपीट करना पड़ेगा. प्लीज लिखिए. प्लीज राइट. We are writing about the caste issue first. Why I have told you this broad whole thing? Because later we will talk about Arya Samaj. They are also talking about caste issue. Okay. Later we will also talk about Jyotiba Phule and Savitribai Phule. They are talking about abolition of caste system in totality, not a reform of the caste system. That is why मैंने बोला reform is one thing. Now when you are reforming the caste system, what do you think? What about caste endogamy? What about restrictions on inter-caste dining? Those who talk about reform of the caste system, will they argue for abolition of these practices or will not argue for abolition of these practices? Those who argue for reform of caste system, will they argue for abolition of untouchability? Argue for abolition of caste endogamy? No, they will not argue for abolition of caste endogamy because this is what helps preserve the caste system. They will not argue for abolition of caste endogamy, or they will not support inter-caste dining. Why am I telling you this? Because अगर ब्राह्मो समाज में statement ये लिखा आता है in your prelims examination that the Brahmo Samaj supported the abolition of caste system, it is a wrong statement. The Brahmo Samaj supported abolition of caste endogamy, it is a wrong statement. And there is a logic to it because they are arguing for a reform rather than abolition. So you first write down, then I'll do something about. First you write down. About the next line you write down. No, characteristics. चलिए ठीक है आप. अच्छा लिखिए. Please write down first. The caste, the Brahmo Samaj argued for a reform of, the Brahmo Samaj argued for a reform of caste system the Brahmo Samaj argued for a reform of the caste system by the abolition of untouchability, by the abolition of untouchability, argued for a reform of the caste system by the abolition of untouchability. Even as they argued not even, just cut down even, as they argued that untouchability represents the worst form of social discrimination. Untouchability represents the worst form of social discrimination. Untouchability represents the worst form of social discrimination, similar to the practice of slavery. Similar to the practice of slavery that the West had done away with. Similar to the practice of slavery that the West had done away with. Similar to the practice of slavery that the West had done away with. Next you write, similar to the practice of slavery that the West had done away with. Okay. The abolition of untouchability and the reform of caste system, the abolition of untouchability and the reform of caste system supported by Brahmo Samaj did not translate into an explicit support for intercaste marriages or intercaste dining. Okay, that is clear, right? Why they did not? Because they are only arguing for reform rather than doing away with. Meaning those who argue for abolition of caste system will say what? Support intercaste marriages and intercaste dining. We will see later Ambedkar supported them. Okay, Jyotiba Phule supported them. Now wait.
Last question. Done.
So, okay. So basically, this is something. Now, देखिए अभी अब हाथ पैर जो हिलाना है शांत होके हिलाइए, है ना? So the next thing that we're talking about is the role of the reform with respect to the position of women. Yeah. What the reform that they had proposed was do away with the category of untouchables, and even they can be accommodated within other groups like the Shudras. That's it. But that is something that will seem to you as a very small thing right now. But a couple of 2 centuries ago, to argue for doing away with untouchables was seen by many as an attack on the caste system itself. Something that was considered by especially the upper caste groups as an integral part of the social structure. So yes, that is why they are reformists, which are arguing for a certain amount of change, not for a very radical dismantling of the system itself. Okay, that is what is there. They are not proposing any major changes in the whole caste structure of the 4 varnas. That is there. Anything else? Yeah. That basically the Dalits or the untouchables are what are termed as the scheduled castes. Okay. Whereas the OBCs are those who predominantly include certain categories of caste, subcastes within the Shudra group. That is there. So, because the constitution talks about these 2 as separate categories, right? So that is what is related to. The scheduled castes are considered as qualitatively much more discriminated against than the OBCs, because the OBCs were still a part of the Varna system. But the scheduled castes or the untouchables or the Dalits were the ones who stayed outside the system and were the most discriminated against in the society. That is that. Yes.
Between 4th and 10th century, some kings in South India perform yajna and go from lower caste.
This is something that's called Sanskritization, etc. That even, so what I've told you is a broad overview. But it is not, if you will go into sociological texts, etc., you will find that what has been argued that even lower castes did enjoy a certain degree of mobility and could acquire the status of a upper caste by adopting rituals, practices, etc. This is what is called as Sanskritization, etc.
But sir, it is written in history itself.
हाँ, so I'm not denying that it is not there. It was there. But हम जो बात कर रहे हैं एक broad बात कर रहे हैं. Abhi, when you will study social issues, you will study what is also the broad difference between varnas, caste, Sanskritization, westernization, what is the certain amount of social mobility allowed within the caste system also. Okay, but definitely in terms of comparing to other societies where there is no such system of hereditary system of social system of division of labor, this is definitely much less mobile and less and this is much less mobile or more fixed than many other social systems of division of labor. That is it. Other social system of division of labor और क्या है? Placement agency, education. अरे if you have higher education today, आप बन जाइए कंप्यूटर साइंटिस्ट बन जाइए, नासा बन जाइए, कुछ बन जाइए.
These are the things evolved from modern times from 100 and 200 years.
Yes.
How can you compare the old practice systems and modern?
ये देखिए कंपैरिजन तो हमेशा दो चीज़ों के बीच में होगा, ओल्ड और न्यू. न्यू ऑलवेज नीड नॉट नेसेसरली मीन मॉडर्न. New always need not necessarily mean modern and old need not necessarily always mean primitive. That is also there. Okay, so just because something happened 200 years ago, not necessarily that what is happening today. For example, you look at this architecture, जिसमें हम बैठे हैं. If you look, older architectures used to have high arch ceilings, which would allow easier flow of air. तो कमरा ठंडा रहता था. So newer form of construction is not necessarily better than the older form of construction. ये नहीं कह रहा हूँ मैं कि new is always better, old is always primitive, or what? How can you compare the past with the present? That is what comparison can happen. Comparisons happen across time as well as within the same time frame. So Brahmo Samaj, देखिए Brahmo Samaj and I'll talk about other groups within Brahmo Samaj also. Adi Brahmo Samaj, Sadharan Brahmo Samaj, we'll come to. There are other divisions within Brahmo Samaj also. Just understand this much, then I'll come to these points later. Now, yeah. अभी बहुत चीज़ों पे आएंगे, आर्य समाज पे आएंगे, ज्योतिबा फूले पे आएंगे. Jyotiba Phule talks about the Aryan theory of invasion of caste, etc. We'll come to that later. The other one that we are talking about, any other doubts? Apart from these two is the role of women. Apart from the other two is the position or social reform with respect to the position of women. Here, basically, ये बहुत ही simple है, इसमें कुछ नहीं है. That ultimately they are supporting what? The abolition of, firstly, sati. Ram Mohan Roy supported the abolition of sati primarily because he was very young when his elder brother died. In 1811, his elder brother died and Ram Mohan Roy's elder brother's wife committed sati. This had a huge impact on his mindset and he, from the very starting, 1820s itself, was campaigning for the abolition of sati. It is in 1829 that under William Bentinck, a law was introduced for the abolition of sati. This practice of sati basically involved that after the husband's death, woman also, the wife also joined the husband in the heavenly abode. Okay. And apart from this, there was also, they opposed the practices of child marriage and supported increasing the minimum age of marriage. Okay. They also supported the legalization of widow remarriage. Also argued against polygamy. Now, just understand this, that all these issues are interrelated. Also, they were supporters of women education. They supported women education. See, one of the things was that often child marriage was very common. Women were often married off at a very young age, just about when they attained puberty. At a age of 9 years, 10 years, 11 years, 12 years, around that age, women were often married across. And a 10-year-old woman, it was not uncommon for a 10-year-old to get married to a 20-year-old or a 25-year-old. The average life expectancy in India during 1830s and 40s was around 40 years or so. So by the time the husband reached 40, the woman was 25. And when husband reached 40, then he went to heaven. Women also had two options, either to join them in heaven or remain widow for their entire lives. The practice of sati was more prevalent in the upper castes, okay, not in the lower caste groups. And the practice of sati, so the problem was that child marriage, and so when a woman, by the time she became 25, she could either commit sati or she could remain a widow for the rest of her life. So that is why they supported legalization of widow remarriage also. And they supported women education also. Okay. Now, there are some individuals like Vishnu Shastri Pandit. He formed the Widow Remarriage Association in 1856. Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. He also supported women education and widow remarriage. And the British government introduced a law in 1856 for legalization of widow remarriage. Introduced a law in 1856 for legalization of widow remarriage. Clear? So, these are some of the things. Now, let me just emphasize one more idea here. Whatever social reforms the Brahmo Samaj introduced, the Brahmo Samaj never gave public speeches. The Brahmo Samaj never gave public speeches arguing that all these changes must be brought about position of women or within the caste system or within religion. Because what would happen then? Brahmo Samaj would also join heavenly abode. The Brahmo Samaj never dared to go out and reach out to the masses by talking to them directly, by giving public speeches. ऐसे देख लीजिए, whichever Baba that you can think of today says anything about these issues. For example, if you look about there are many religious people in India today that have assumed a position of prominence. How many of them openly support intercaste marriages? How many of them openly support the abolition of dowry? How many of them openly support the abolition of female feticide? Very few, okay, or none. So, देखिए जब ये लोग आज नहीं बोल सकते तो इनके लिए तब बोलना तो बहुत ही it was difficult. Also, just one more thing. Also, they supported the abolition of female infanticide. Then female feticide did not happen. Rather, what was common was infanticide. That after the birth, when the sex of the child was determined, they would basically starve the female child or feed him certain kind of food, etc., which would result in their death. So, female infanticide was also common. They opposed all of these practices, but how? By appealing to the British to bring about social change. And how could the British bring about social change? By bringing about laws. for abolition of social evils. That is why the British brought in the law for abolition of sati in 1829 and for the legalization of widow remarriage in 1856. That is something which is happening at this point of time. That is what they are supporting. What is the strategy that they support? Is not a direct talking to the masses, but what? Involving the British to bring about legislative change, and then using these legislations to bring about a social change in the society. We'll talk a bit more about this later. First you write down this. Okay. Yeah, I'll give you time to ask questions. Just first write down, then you can ask. The next para, the Brahmo Samaj introduced a series of the Brahmo Samaj undertook, not introduced, the Brahmo Samaj undertook a series of steps to argue for an improvement, in the position of women. In society, such as A. They demanded the abolition of sati, such as A. They demanded the abolition of sati, for which a law was introduced in 1829. B. They supported the abolition of child marriage and legalization of widow remarriage. In 1856, a law for legalization of widow remarriage was introduced. C. They argued against female infanticide, against polygamy, infanticide. They argued against female infanticide and supported women education as well. Now, these names, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Vishnu Shastri Pandit, Widow Remarriage Association, all of that you will find in the PowerPoint presentation also. I am not dictating everything. In terms of names and facts, we are only focusing on the major ones here. Okay. Now, the other thing that is about women. Now, this is partly about the Brahmo Samaj. Lekin, aapke prelims exam mein, one of the things that you should remember was also the issues that the Brahmo Samaj did not necessarily pick up. Okay. These are the issues what? Related to what? Promotion of intercaste marriages, etc. And I will come to a bit more of them in a minute. But two other organizations, after the death of Ram Mohan Roy, you see that the Brahmo Samaj was led first by Devendranath Tagore and then by Keshav Chandra Sen. Now, there are two things here, that after, and this is important also from your prelims point of view, that after the Brahmo Samaj, the Brahmo Samaj after the death of Ram Mohan Roy basically was split into two broad groups. Okay, one were those who, firstly after Ram Mohan Roy, it was Devendranath Tagore. Devendranath Tagore was the grandfather of Rabindranath Tagore. Okay, so they come from the long line of Tagores, who are one of the influential, relatively wealthy and educated sections of the Bengali society. The Brahmo Samaj was also an organization primarily centered in and around Bengal. Okay, so Devendranath Tagore is predominantly a member of what? Of the Bengali society, and the Brahmo Samaj also is centered in and around Bengal and Bihar to begin with. Primarily in urban areas. Okay, that is also something there. Now, it is Devendranath Tagore who is largely keeping Brahmo Samaj along its pre-established lines. But later you see that Keshav Chandra Sen argued for a more radical turn for the Brahmo Samaj, where he is going ahead and arguing what? That he is going ahead and arguing that the caste system must be done away with. The caste system must be abolished, and he supported inter-caste marriages and inter-caste marriages as well as dining. Okay, so he is arguing not for a reform of the caste system but for a total abolition of the caste system. So this is something, and also supported inter-caste dining, etc. Now this is something that is unacceptable to Devendranath Tagore and many associated with them, and this is what leads to a split in the Brahmo Samaj, where Devendranath Tagore and their followers basically term themselves as what are called as the Adi, or the original. Adi means original. Okay, Adivasi, original inhabitants of the land. So Adi Brahmo Samaj, and Keshav Chandra Sen and his followers, eventually Keshav Chandra Sen was also found not adhering to the ideas, but it is what group which eventually leads to the formation of the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj. The Adi Brahmo Samaj and the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj. Okay, this is something that they are talking about. Now, why am I telling you this? Prelims में आपको इतना पता होना चाहिए. Okay, about what are the issues. Now, just a few more things. About the Brahmo Samaj. What broad issues the Brahmo Samaj did not raise? This is important from your prelims point of view, because देखिए, some of the issues that Brahmo Samaj did not pick up. For example, Ram Mohan Roy supported inheritance rights in property for whom? Women. Ram Mohan Roy supported inheritance rights in property for women, but Brahmo Samaj did not openly make up its mind about it. More importantly, issues related to what? The issue of birth and rebirth, and the belief in the theory of karma, right? जैसा कर्म करोगे वैसा फल मिलेगा, ऐसा कुछ होता है कि नहीं होता है? ये that is what is a matter that they leave it to the individuals to decide whether you want to believe in birth and rebirth or not. That there is, because often in the Hindu way of life, a number of things, not just in Hindu way of life, in many other religions also, is explained by this idea that there is some afterlife, or that there is another birth which is going to happen. how is it that an individual who is born a Shudra can become a upper caste? Is when he fulfills his duties of being a Shudra in this Janam, in this life, then in the next life he will be promoted to the higher caste. So for this life he should follow the basically his caste duties and identities that have been given to him. Okay, next life he will be rewarded. ऐसे होता है. And so that is there. So they are not making up their mind on any of these issues. Also on equal employment opportunities for women. Equal employment opportunities for women. They are not talking about anything significant about equal employment opportunities for women also. That women must get the equal right to work or equal wages. ऐसा कुछ the Brahmo Samaj is not picking up. Okay. Now, let me just elaborate on one or two more points about what was the strategy of that the Brahmo Samaj used. That I told you was a top-down strategy of legislative change, meaning first you change the law, then it will be implemented and it will change the mindset in the society. Now ये मैं इसलिए बता रहा हूँ because this is something that you can use in other places also. Suppose you writing, you've done ethics, yes, right, almost, right, where you will say कि भाई you are one district magistrate of one district, then suppose you are given a campaign. I'll give you a ऐसा बड़ा simple सा चीज. Suppose you are district magistrate, you have to implement a program for what? आजकल चल रहा है total sanitation और बेटी बचाओ बेटी पढ़ाओ, right? So these are some things which are often commonly talked about. तो ऐसा question आ सकता है आपको that how do you go about implementing these programs. इसके लिए जो मैं यहाँ बता रहा हूँ ये वहाँ पे भी use हो सकता है. It only depends on whether you can see that or not. देखिए, any social change we say happens when there is a certain amount of social consensus in the society and also there is some complementary legislative or push in the same direction. Let's say beti bachao beti padhao. Okay, so basically you say that it is primarily about what? Female, it is primarily about improving child sex ratio, improving women's access to education, tackling sex selective abortions, etc., etc., right? So this is something that is about this is what is the social change which is desired. How do you bring that about? You currently have a law. Which is that law? The PC-PNDT Act 1993, then later amended 2003. Okay, the PC-PNDT Act is a law which bans sex selective abortions and sex determination, right? So you have a law which basically proposes punishment for everybody who is undergoing as well as who is doing. So that is a law which aims to tackle this problem of sex selective abortions. But you also have a campaign. Which is that campaign? The Beti Bachao Beti Padhao, right? Campaign. Now this is only a part of the solution. See, for example, we say that for implementing any law, there must be a certain degree of social consensus. For implementing any law, there must be a certain degree of social consensus about the desirability of the law in the first place. If there is not, whatever law may be passed by the parliament, it will never be implemented effectively. देखिए बड़ी सिंपल सी बात है, रेड लाइट है. एनी लॉ, ये क्रिमिनल थ्योरी का बेसिक फंडा है, that any law for its efficient implementation requires a certain degree of consensus in the society. अगर वो नहीं है तो social change will never happen, whatever law you may bring. For example, suppose you dear Delhi में बड़ा common, you're standing at red light. It is because 90% of the people are stopping at the red light that the traffic police can catch one or two people who are jumping the red light. Because there is a social consensus amongst you that we must stop at the red light. The day you say कि नहीं, there is no social consensus, चलो. So that is the day when the police will not be very effective. ऐसा होता है. इसीलिए when you are jumping the red light, don't jump it alone. Jump it with everybody. Whom will the police catch? So a society which lacks social consensus will never implement a law very efficiently, even if it is passed. So the act for tackling sex selective abortion has been there since 1990s. But child sex ratios in India have been declining in every census. Why? The law, if law would have been merely sufficient to bring about desirable social change, then what would have happened? It hasn't happened. Rather, it has gone worse and worse and worse. So that is primarily shows what? That laws have limited utility unless there is social consensus. So Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao is about shackling or doing away with patriarchal ideas which devalue the female child, educate the female child and treat them as equals to the male child. As that will change what? Mindset. If mindset changes and a consensus emerges that female child are as valuable as the male child, then it will automatically decrease the number of people who resort to sex selective abortions, and it will become easier and efficient to implement the law also. That is why when you bring focus on bringing about social change, you focus on building social consensus to bring about a change. That is what is called as a bottom-up strategy. When you firstly aim on changing the law and hope that this will bring about a change in the mindset, this is called as a top-down strategy. One is a bottom-up strategy and the other is a top-down strategy. Which is better? It is a futile discussion. Suppose you're writing a case study on that, say on sex selective abortion, you should say that we should want both and bring both of them together rather than saying that we'll use only one or the other. That is why, is legislative change important? Yes. But is it sufficient? No. Why did I tell you all of this story? Is because the Brahmo Samaj is doing what? The Brahmo Samaj is doing top down. It is not going and giving public speeches, talking to the masses, etc. to bring about a change in the mindset of the society directly. It is only resorting to a top down legislative change strategy for which they are relying upon whom? The British. So they see British as positive agents or not? Yes, they see British as positive agents of that would be useful in bringing about desirable social change. That is there. Okay, if you read Bandyopadhyay only writes that the Brahmo Samaj relied upon a top-down strategy to bring about social change and thus was of limited utility. He is assuming कि आपको पता है top down क्या है, bottom up क्या है, bottom up के क्या फायदे हैं, top down के क्या फायदे हैं, and how top down is necessary but definitely not at all sufficient. So, do you think the Brahmo Samaj was very effective? देखिए, there is a law today, now there is section 377 has been struck down and decriminalization of homosexuality, saying that it is now legal for you for having same sex relationships etc. अपने घर में जाइए और पूछिएगा, है ना, तो आपको पता चलेगा कि सुप्रीम कोर्ट का लॉ घर के बाहर खत्म है ना, घर के अंदर घर वालों का है, right? So not everything that merely the judiciary invokes becomes something that accepted social norm. It has its limits as well. Okay, that is there. So you can first write down. देखिए ये मैं नहीं लिखवाऊंगा, हर चीज देखिए हर see one thing you have to understand. I am teaching you history with tidbits here and there. Okay, I can't be dictating all the tidbits. Otherwise वो class सिर्फ history की लगेगा, ज्ञान की class है. So we are predominantly limiting ourselves to writing about history, though I am telling you other points as well. So you can first write down about this. The Brahmo Samaj later underwent, the Brahmo Samaj later underwent divisions after the death of Ram Mohan Roy. After the death of Ram Mohan Roy, with Devendranath Tagore, leading the Adi Brahmo Samaj, which was relatively conservative, and Keshav Chandra Sen supported a more radical outlook demanding the abolition of caste system and supported intercaste marriages and intercaste dining. His followers eventually established the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj. Okay. Now, the next thing that we're talking about, apart from this, is right in the next para, assessment of the Brahmo Samaj. What we are trying to answer is how effective was the Brahmo Samaj. The Brahmo Samaj predominantly enjoyed a base amongst urban, educated, middle class of the Bengali society. It adopted a top-down strategy of arguing for a desirable social It argued for adopting a top-down strategy of desirable social change. Through legislative means. They looked upon the British They looked upon the British as the positive. They looked upon the British as positive players in this direction. They looked upon the British as positive players in this direction. However, the Brahmo Samaj failed to reach out directly to the masses. And thus lagged a wide appeal. And thus lacked a wider appeal. Not wide, and thus lacked a wider appeal. Okay, that is there. Now, this is partly an assessment of the Brahmo Samaj. See, I'll tell you something. When I was in college, my biggest problem with college life was only this, that we used to study in Uttar Pradesh. Okay, and back then in Uttar Pradesh, there was not much of electricity. Okay. So already it was a government college and we didn't have ACs in the lecture theatre. So at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, like this, when we used to have classes, whoever may be the teacher, we had no intention of listening to them. Our only focus was on the clock. Ki kab khatam ho, and we get the attendance and we go. 8 o'clock class also, we were like this only, because 8 o'clock the focus was only to reach the class. Breakfast is there in the back. Hostel की mess से उठाया, it's there in the back. Class में खा लेंगे, सब class में हो जाएगा, बस पहुंच जाओ, so that you get attendance. So this is a measure of your dedication, कि आप यहाँ बैठे भी और सुन भी रहे. यह मुझे लग रहा है कि आप सुन रहे. So I can only empathize with you. I have never sweated in my life as much as I've sweated in the last 1 hour, since the last 10 years. This is my dedication also. I am on the other side now. So that is it. Now, the next thing that we are talking about after the Brahmo Samaj is predominantly a few other organizations. Okay. Now, one of the other organizations that we are talking about, this is for the reforms amongst Hindus. The next that we are talking about is for reforms amongst Muslims. Okay. And that is formed by Syed Ahmad Khan. So, all of these that I am discussing in the class are important from your prelims point of view. Here, you can now write on with me. Okay. You can write with me. There is not much to explain from here onwards for now. Okay. Now, Syed Ahmad Khan basically is the one who is arguing for social reform amongst Muslims. Okay. And it is Syed Ahmad Khan who argued that Muslim backwardness was due to lack of access to education and jobs. And if Muslim backwardness had to be addressed, they must be granted access to education and jobs. It is in this context that he supported and he established what was called as the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College or Mao in 1878. Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College. That is what he established in Aligarh in 1878. Okay. So he established this college primarily with the aim of what? Promoting the spirit of education. He said that access to education, higher education, etc. is critical for access to jobs, and only when you have access to education and jobs, Muslim backwardness can be addressed. He also, now it is in this context that when you look at the words Anglo and Oriental, he is emphasizing, we had discussed education policy, right? Now he is emphasizing that elements of both Western education and with the emphasis on Indian schools of learning or Indian schools of thought must form the curriculum. So I am not writing this, but this is fairly obvious. We discussed the Anglicists and the Orientalists, you remember, right? So they are arguing to merge the scientific advancements of the West with the social and cultural emphasis on the traditions of the Indian society. So they argued for imbibing elements of Western scientific advancement with religious and cultural foundation from Indian traditions. Now, Sayyid Ahmad Khan with religious and cultural foundations from Indian traditions. Now, it is Sayyid Ahmad Khan who also said something important. Okay, Sayyid Ahmad Khan said that if you look at the revolt of 1857, he said that Muslims must draw a lesson from the revolt of 1857. If you remember, I told you before also that Muslims were held one of the primary instigators for the revolt of 1857. The revolt happened under the banner of Mughal Empire, under the name of Bahadur Shah Zafar. Also, a number of those who revolted like Hazrat Mahal, etc., they were also Muslims, and also a number of Muslim soldiers formed the part of those who mutinied against the British. So, Muslims were held one of the primary groups responsible for the outbreak of revolt of 1857, and there was a discrimination against what? Recruitment of Muslims in jobs, whether it was in the army or in other government jobs. So Sayyid Ahmad Khan said that this is a lesson that Muslims must draw, and he argued that Muslims must stay away from any overt political activity against whom? Must stay away from any overt political activity against the British. Okay, because the last time they did, they faced discrimination, and that discrimination has adversely affected their access to education and jobs and made them backward. Okay, so he is saying that stay away from any political activities against the British. So is Sayyid Ahmad Khan going to be supportive of involvement of Muslims in Congress? No. So that's what I'm saying. That is not the case. But at the same point of time, Sayyid Ahmad Khan was also an individual who was supportive of Hindu-Muslim unity. Now his caution to Muslims to stay away from any political activity against the Congress was dictated by the fact that he appealed what? He appealed that if Muslims pleaded loyalty to the British, this could change what? Attitude of the British towards Muslims, and this would provide what? Access to education and jobs. For access to education, they said this could, if the British change their attitude towards Muslims, they could provide land, they could provide funds for setting up educational institutions for improving access to education and jobs for Muslims. So he supported pleading loyalty to the British, which could what? Bring about a change in its attitude towards Muslims. Now, this does not mean that Sayyid Ahmad Khan was a communal individual or something, that he was not a supporter of Hindu-Muslim unity. And if you see, there was a recent RSS conclave, 3 days international conclave called by the RSS. And when the chief of RSS, Bhagwat, himself says that Sayyid Ahmad Khan was a strong supporter of Hindu-Muslim unity, so there is no other doubt. Abhi to God himself has told you that. So in that context, what you see is that Sayyid Ahmad Khan was a proponent, and this is where he quotes, Bhagwat also quoted Sayyid Ahmad Khan to say that he attended a meeting of the Arya Samaj in the 1880s, and he says that there is no difference between Hindus and Muslims except in the way they pray. We are all the people from the same culture, the same land, speaking the same language, etc. There is nothing much more difference amongst Hindus and Muslims apart from the fact that both pray in a different fashion. That's it. And he also said that Hindus and Muslims are two eyes of the beautiful bride of what is called as India. So in that context, basically he is a supporter. अभी आपको beautiful bride का analogy उन्होंने बोला तो अभी मैं क्या बोलूं? Right. So it is in this context he was a strong proponent of Hindu-Muslim unity, and in fact some of the earliest funding for the establishment of the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College and later the Aligarh Muslim University came from a number of Hindu rulers in and around Aligarh. In fact, the first graduate of the Aligarh Muslim University was also a Hindu individual. Okay, so in that context, though he primarily focused the Mao and AMU primarily even on the educational advancements of Muslims, it was not restricted only to Muslims. Okay, so and he was a strong proponent of Hindu-Muslim unity. Apart from this, he is arguing for what? Social reform in the light of reason and rationality. So much so that he argued that religion is not immutable. Religion is not immutable, and he is arguing for a reform of religion in the light of reason. Okay, mutation is something that has changed. Immutation is something which cannot be changed. So he's saying that religion can undergo change and religion can be reformed in the light of rationality. He also started the journal Tehzeeb, ul Akhlaq. This journal was started by him in the 1870s, and it focused on spreading the ideas of scientific inquiry. This journal focused on spreading the ideas of scientific This journal focused on spreading the ideas of scientific inquiry. That is what is there. Tehzeebul Akhlaq. Okay. Now, these are some of the things that was started by Sayyid Ahmad Khan. The Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College that he established, eventually it was established by him in 1878. They were looking for more funds. and land, and wanted that it must be expanded to the status of a university, which did not happen very easily. It took another almost 40 years, that it is only in 1920, 1921 that Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College is elevated to the level of what later becomes the Aligarh Muslim University. So, and Sayyid Ahmad Khan was obviously not alive by the time it became the Aligarh Muslim University, but he had laid the foundation of what eventually became, and he made the initial efforts. That is why Sayyid Ahmad Khan is held in higher regard. But ek cheez aur, Sayyid Ahmad Khan argued that religion is not immutable, and he wrote a 12-volume interpretation of the Quran. He wrote a 12-volume interpretation of the Quran. Okay, this is just something that you must know. Okay, that he wrote a 12-volume interpretation of the Quran, and he made a very important statement that, and this is just for interest point of view, he made a very important statement that the Quran is not immutable. That he is arguing that even the Quran can be reformed. ऐसा जो लोग बोलते हैं उनका क्या होता है? Fatwa, right? And he made such statements because of which Sayyid Ahmad Khan did not enjoy too much popularity. Aligarh is close to Bareilly, and Bareilly etc. is the home of the Bareilwi school of thought. The Bareilwi school of thought is a conservative school of Islam. They did not view Sayyid Ahmad Khan with much kindness, who was talking about Western education, etc., scientific reasoning, inquiry. And Sayyid Ahmad Khan made the statement that the Quran is immutable. This saw a fatwa being issued against him, not by any local imam, etc., but directly by the Imam of Makkah. भाई सऊदी अरेबिया से बिल्कुल फतवा आया सैयद अहमद खान के लिए, and that is why Sayyid Ahmad Khan was not a very popular individual while he was alive. He died a very lonely figure. Okay, so many who even pledge their loyalty to Sayyid Ahmad Khan today do not realize that he was operating in circumstances where arguing for social reform is never a very easy task. Okay, because every society, especially Indian society, is very touchy. अभी आप आज बोलेंगे ऐसा तो बवाल हो जाएगा, right? So, but he was saying that much ago. Now, अभी आपने कहीं और कुछ सुना होगा कि सैयद अहमद खान फाउंडर ऑफ आइडियोलॉजिकल फाउंडर ऑफ पाकिस्तान, ये वो, ऐसा भी सुना हो सकता है आपने कहीं ना कहीं. ये सब में कुछ सत्य नहीं है. Because Sayyid Ahmad Khan, yes, advised Muslims to stay away from the Congress. That has got nothing to do with the formation of Pakistan. There is no single speech or writing of Sayyid Ahmad Khan where he talks about the need for forming a separate political state for Muslims, which has got nothing to do with it. Okay, but still you will keep hearing about this from time to time, because the Pakistani history textbook, if you ever pick up a Pakistani history textbook, you will find that they say that their ideological founder is Sayyid Ahmad Khan. So that is another matter. Everybody wants to trace their ideas to some great individual in the past, and it is here Sayyid Ahmad Khan. Many within the RSS would want to trace their origin to Vivekanand, or go back as much as to the Harappan civilization. But that does not necessarily mean that that was true. So that is in that context, because none of the writings and all the public speeches made by Sayyid Ahmad Khan are preserved in the Aligarh Muslim University. So in that context, there is no question of if and but. We can only read the minds of those who have died long ago by their writings and their speeches, not by anything else. So if that is the barometer, then there is nothing to say that what Sayyid Ahmad Khan had anything to do with the formation of either Pakistan or something close to that. Any doubts? Anything you want to ask on this? Did he support two-nation theory? वही मैं बोल रहा हूँ, no two-nation theory, no Pakistan, nothing. There is no such discussion in the 1870s, 80s and 90s till Sayyid Ahmad Khan was alive. That is why communism and partition, two-nation theory, all of that comes much later, during the 1930s onwards. Okay, that is there. Anything else? demanded special representation for Muslims in government jobs, etc. Ambedkar demanded special representation for lower caste groups in politics also, in education also, in jobs also. There were many groups. For example, the Justice Party demanded separate reservation for Dravidians in government jobs. There were many such constituents who demanded special representation and reservation. That did not mean that they demanded a nation for lower castes or something of that sort. So, demand for adequate representation in jobs, reservation, etc. does not necessarily translate into a two-nation theory. This is what happens is when we look at the past with the eyes of the present, that you know that a Pakistan was formed. So, you are trying to look, acha koi to hoga. There is no such talk here by Syed Ahmad Khan in any of his speeches or in his ideas. That is there. Anything else? Okay. Now, the next one that we are talking about is Henry Viven de Rosio, who started what was the Young Bengal movement. इसमें कुछ भी नहीं याद रखने. Just you should need to know that this is largely factual, but you have to remember it, that he started the Young Bengal movement in the 1830s. See, Syed Ahmad Khan is operating when? During the 1870s, 80s and 90s. Okay. This is also one of the movement which was happening in the 1830s. And the Young Bengal movement is something which is started by Henry Viven de Rosio. He was a university professor in where? In Bengal, in Calcutta. And he was a radical social reformer. Because he was a radical social reformer because he argued for women or he argued for widow remarriage. He argued to support abolition of caste system, and he supported intercaste marriages, intercaste dining, etc. because he is supporting abolition of caste system. He is arguing almost the same things like the Brahmo Samaj, but going a step ahead to argue for the abolition of caste system also. What do you think will happen? He is a university professor. What will happen? He will be thrown out of the university. Right. So that is what happens with Henry Viven de Rosio. University professor की reach कहाँ तक होती है? To the students. So his reach is also limited to his students. He did not have any mass appeal, and the Young Bengal movement died before it was born. In the sense that he is thrown out of the university, तो अभी livelihood ही नहीं रहा, तो social reform कैसे आएगा? Right. So it did not have much of an impact. It was one of those organizations which were most radical and perhaps ahead of its times. Then, and that is what is being argued here. Is that point clear? There is nothing much to remember here. बस ये आपको बताना चाहिए who started the movement when it was there in Bengal and demanded more radical social reforms. The next one that we are more interested in focusing upon, देखिए आपको एक और चीज बताता हूँ. Now most of these organizations that we have seen till now, whether I'm telling you one or two more, then we'll come to this point. Now we have talked about Hindus, we have talked about Muslims. For the Parsis, an organization for social reform was established by Dada Bhai Naroji, who established the Rehnumai Mazdasyan Sabha. Here basically he argued for, this was an organization aimed at improving the position of Parsi women. Aimed at improving the position of the Parsi women. It aimed at improving the position of the Parsi woman. Okay, and Dadabhai Naoroji's major contribution is not in social reforms. His major contribution is in terms of the economic analysis that we have discussed before. Okay, this was only an additional role, but that is not his major role. All organizations formed by Dadabhai Naoroji, okay, all organizations formed by Dadabhai Naoroji, newspapers started by him, all of that is very important. If we'll go forward later, we'll see Dadabhai Naoroji formed the East India Association, which was centered in London. So Dadabhai Naoroji associated all organizations, all issues that he picked up, ये आपको पता होना चाहिए. These are asked in the prelims examination very commonly. Okay, that is why you should know them. Now, one of the things when you look at Hindu social reforms organization or Muslim organizations or that of Parsis, what do you see? These are organizations predominantly led by upper caste. For example, Dadabhai Naoroji, for example, Sayyid Ahmad Khan was also an upper class individual. He had also received a considerable degree of Western education. He had also studied in London. Okay, so most of these social reformers that we have studied till now are whom? Men, and men of upper class who are Western educated. And who are their subjects? What the change that they are arguing for is predominantly about whom? Improving the position of lower caste, or improving the position of women, or improving the position of women within their communities, or caste, lower caste within their communities, etc. So the agents of social change are whom? Are the men who are coming from upper class Western educated sections. And who are the subjects of social change? Lower caste or women. Now, आपके mains examination में they had asked once a question, 2014. They had asked the question that do you think, or in your opinion, should organizations arguing for improvement of position of women be headed by men, or should men be allowed to head organizations arguing for improvement in position of women? ये paper 1 का, GS paper 1 का mains का question था. Okay, that should organizations arguing for improving the position of women must be headed by men. Discuss your views. So what do you think? The point was, should men be allowed to head organizations arguing for improving the position of women? Discuss your views. Should be allowed. The question is discuss your views. Okay, discuss. मतलब discuss का मतलब कुछ और भी है. हाँ या ना में नहीं है जवाब, है ना? So what? Okay, so let me just rephrase this. What are the advantages of having men, or what are the advantages of having men heading organizations which are arguing for improving position of women in the society? That if you have men heading organizations arguing for improving position of women, what can they serve? What can they do? They can serve as role model for other men. So those men who argue for improving position of women can serve as role models for bringing about a mindset change in the society. The change in mindset is required in the mindset of both the males as well as the men as well as women in the society. Women need to assert their rights and men need to be more accommodative. And in that context, that if you have agents like Ram Mohan Roy or agents like many others who are arguing for a more accommodative or for equal rights for women, they will serve as what? Positive role models. And you see in history there are these examples. What about or what is the other or what is the flip side to it, or what is the advantage of having women leading organizations arguing for improvement in position of women? Women may be more familiar, or women may be able to bring more insights into the discrimination faced by women, and that may bring also not just more insight, but they may also be in a position to bring more urgency to the table on issues faced by women. What else? women, what he's saying is that women may find it more, or find organizations more approachable if they are headed by women agents. What else? That women, again, just like men can serve as role model, women can also serve as role model for other women, especially in acquiring leadership positions in organizations, as well as to bring about the desirable change for women. They may serve as positive social agents. ये सारी बकवास मैं आपको क्यों बता रहा हूँ? There is a question waiting to happen one day or the other, and that is about women reservation bill. That there must be reservation for women in the legislative process in the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. Her political party supports, but there are other debates. What are the issues and challenges? अब अपनी NCERT भी पढ़ेंगे ना. If you read your NCERT, the working of Indian Constitution वाली, उसमें भी लिखा है, उसमें एक लड़का और एक लड़की बने पूरी बुक में. See, NCERTs are very valuable source of reading, provided you know how to use them. Okay, so if you read the NCERT of the working of Indian Constitution, you will see that there is one guy and one girl. They keep asking questions on every page. है ना? वो हर पेज पे चुनमुन बने रहते हैं. They will keep asking those questions. There is also questions asked there about reservation for women. Okay, so what are the advantages, what are the concerns, etc. इस पे भी question आ सकता है. When you have more women parliamentarians, issues related to women may find more urgency and more mention. These women may serve as positive agents of social change, may bring more and may serve as role models. Also, this does not mean that men cannot argue for social change, for improving position of women, because historically you see a number of such organizations were headed by whom? Men in 19th century India. So there is no blanket solution, yes or no, but there are potential advantages of having both. So even though while we understand that men must also be allowed to head organizations for arguing for improving positions of women, what must also be realized is the value of having organizations arguing for improving position of women headed by women, because they bring more urgency, they serve as positive role models, and they may be able to build more pressure. That is what is also needed. This is exactly the same reasons why you need reservation for women where? In parliament. That you see that whether it is labor force participation of women today, it is one of the lowest in the world. India has a low labor force participation of women in the range of 24-25%. 23-24-25%, in that range, which has probably increased a bit here and there, but it has largely stayed in that range, which is one of the lowest in the world. Now, when you have more women parliamentarians, they are more likely to pick up issues. That conditions must be made facilitative for what? Women's participation in the labor force or their employment, because with education and employment, their bargaining position within the society and within families is set to improve. So all these issues may receive more focus if you have more women parliamentarians, and the democracy will get more representative or not. If you have women representation in parliament today is around 10 to 11%, whereas they constitute 50% of the population. So that is also going to get more representative. ये मैंने इसलिए बताया because the number of these things can be seen at the interface of history and social issues also. Is this point clear? So that is there. We'll stop here today. अभी next class में चालू करते हैं, because otherwise there will be more students waiting outside anyways, and I'm also very. So we have a class tomorrow also.